If you're a woman who's ever felt invisible in a room where decisions are being made, this conversation is for you. Because the people who shape rooms, shape cultures, shape futures aren't always the loudest, the most credentialed, or the most dominant. They're the ones who can move people. And nothing moves people like story. Story is how we make meaning. It's how we transmit truth faster than logic. It's how we bypass defenses and go straight to the human. And that's why storytelling isn't a soft skill. It's a power skill. Today, I'm here with Sonali Fiske, master storyteller, story architecture, narrative builder for revolutionary leaders. And we're not here just to talk about how to tell better stories, but we're here to explore why story has the power to change how we lead, how we're seen, and what becomes possible when we speak from truth instead of performance.
Welcome to The Balanced Leader, hosted by Yan Dang, a leadership and life coach with over 20 years of corporate experience. Drawing from her journey as a former global finance leader and second-generation immigrant, Yan understands the unique challenges women face in male-dominated workplaces. Each episode offers insights on balancing masculine and feminine energies, mastering soft skills, and building emotional intelligence. Join us to transform frustration into empowerment and unlock your authentic leadership potential.
Hey, podcast listeners, welcome to today's episode. I have a very special guest here. Her name is Sonali Fiske, and she was my TEDx speaker coach. As many of you know, I did a big thing last year. I did my own TEDx talk, and Sonali walked me through the whole process. But we're here today to talk about the power of storytelling. And I want to introduce you to Sonali. Sonali, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Oh, thank you, Yan. I'm doing really good. Happy to be here with you and talk about this is one of my favorite topics. So, I'm ready.
You ready to dive in?
So ready to dive in.
So Sonali, if you remember, you had shared with me this really powerful stat about how when people are communicating, when they are talking with story and logic, that people remember 22 times more than if it's just logic itself. And of course, me as an executive, senior leader, I have just been amazed by the men and women who I have seen lead and share stories and really bring people along. So I've always been intrigued by this power of story, but I think also a lot of women are intimidated by it because there's a personal part of it. There's an emotional part of it. And you're kind of stepping out of this like very logical, masculine way of communicating, which we're very used to, right, in the corporate world. But tell me more about that. And I'd love to hear, what your experience has been.
Wow, love this beginning. Boy, you know how to dive right in, don't you? Like, that's absolutely true. And I remember when we started this conversation around, you had so much data and research about anger, or the lack of expressing anger in an authoritarian way. And I remember talking about that with you, how research shows that when information is delivered through story, people retain it up to 22 times more than when it's just presented through facts and case studies and statistics alone. You're right. So because logic gives people information, whereas story gives people meaning. And it breaks my heart when I see such valuable, powerful info that's shared, leaving out the storytelling piece. Because when the data backs this up, when facts are woven into story again, people will remember it 20 times more likely. They'll remember what they've heard 22 times more likely. And that's why most influential leaders don't choose between data and story. They use story to carry the data.
And I think, there's like that emotional connection, right? And I think there are studies that show like when you have an emotional connection to something, you remember it more. It's just more memorable. It's not just a number or something. And I think today's, when we have so many facts, right? When they're just at our fingertips, it's oftentimes that context, that meaning that gets lost in translation. And anybody, like, especially from a finance perspective, like you can spin whatever story you want with data.
Oh my God, we're drowning in data, Yan. You know what I mean? We're drowning in it. We're overstimulated with data, however you want to say that.
Yeah, yeah.
But the storytelling piece, I feel that's missing, especially in the leadership world. We see it in Hollywood. We see it, in the art spaces, but I'm not sure why it's still left out a lot in becoming a stronger spokesperson for our business and for our work. We've been taught that storytelling is optional, something you add on once you've earned authority. But in reality, Anne, storytelling is authority, because stories are how we as humans decide who to trust and who not to trust. Because data informs, like I said, but stories move people to action. I feel like leaders who can't articulate their story lose influence, even if they're super brilliant, and smart and super educated and well read. The story is what stays with us. That's what makes us keep coming back. I mean, it's the same reason we love Netflix and chilling, or watching movies, because it's not because we agree with everything we see on the screen. Hell no. We keep coming back because we love a juicy story. And that's why, Anne, I think platforms like TED are so powerful, not because they're prestigious, but because they force clarity.
And I think the format, a few minutes, right? You get into that story. Because I think sometimes, I have some clients, and women have been accused of this too, of getting lost in their own story when they're not like super connected to themselves. And, I'll probably say I've done it too, right? Like where you're like, oh, you're taking somebody on a journey, but it's not a curated, very clear journey. You're not really sure yourself. And so sometimes there's that thinking, right? But I think what we're talking about here is that storytelling where we are stepping back, creating meaning, really thinking about the audience. And when I think about story, right, it's like people often think story is about communication, but I think it's more than that. It's about regulation, right? If you're feeling emotionally regulated and you can really take in that story, it's also about identity. Like, who's this person in front of me? How do they think? How do they feel? How do they treat their kids? How do they think about the world, right? And it's also about belonging. And you're kind of, as you're hearing somebody's story, you're like, do they belong with me? Do I trust them? Just as you said. But from your perspective, what is really happening inside people when a story lands for them? And I mean, you've coached so many successful speakers, so I want to hear from you. Why does story move us in the way facts never can? How does that show up for you?
What a beautiful thing to say. Thank you for sharing that with me. You're making me think harder and deeper too. I think also what's beautiful about that storytelling piece, Yan, is that if you can't tell your story simply and truthfully, then the world will tell it for you and not always accurately, People love that. I think the emotional specificity of storytelling, people eat that up, right? The personal truth over the polish. I think mostly, Anne, where we are right now, culturally speaking, we're kind of over the veneer, right? The polished keynote type speaker. People want honesty. They want vulnerability, right? They want to feel like they've gone on the same learning journey as you, right? Where it's not this hierarchical structural thing where I'm up here, I'm the speaker up here, and the rest of the audience is down here. They want to feel like there is some common thread there, right? They want to feel humanity in you.
Yeah, what I'm also, thinking about is that mutuality, right? That belonging piece. And if you're like a leader, right, on stage, but you can appear approachable in your language and people can start, hearing what, you have to say and connecting to who you are outside of work, right? That just expands, that level of connection.
And it can be very simple, yeah. It's a lot simpler and more closer to the heart than we think it is. Because I think, Yan, people are exhausted by performative leadership. Audiences, what I find in my years of doing this is that audiences crave truth, not branding, And as women, I know you work with a lot of women. I know they're women. That's your space, so to speak. Women, I find especially, or those of us that identify as women, have been conditioned to wait until we're ready.
Yeah, I think that is like this, like somehow we feel safe if we know the rules and we perform well and we get that check mark. It's like kind of like, when you're, told to act a certain way, ladylike or those types of things.
Oh God, I know.
And you think like, okay, this is what it's supposed to be like. Or like with me, one of the things that I've shared in my past, what kept me from leadership when I was younger was like, I thought I had to be even more masculine than I already was, as like a finance leader. I'm like, well, how do I have to be even more masculine? I have to be a man. But I also realized when I started ascending into different levels of leadership, how much more there was, right? When I see masculine leadership in my mind, it was very different than actually the men that I was surrounded by, right? Where they would share about their stories, where they actually held a lot of feminine values. So it's like you don't see it, and then you like have your societal view of it. But once you're in the room, oftentimes I would be like, oh, I know why this person's in the room. They actually have so much more skill, so much more emotional awareness. And oftentimes they weren't very polished, but that also made them much more human. And you can connect to that.
I love that. To your point, speaking your truth doesn't mean being louder or more aggressive or being more ladylike. It's simply as being clear, even when it's costing you something, because like I said, this is not the era of perfect speakers. I believe this is the era of honest ones. People want honesty more than anything. So get out there and say the thing, speak your truth to power. Be the one that stands up in a room and say, this happened to me and this is why I had to share it with you. So it's time.
Yeah, well, and you talk to so many people with their own TEDx journey, right? And I do think, like, I felt like I went through sort of my own identity shift, like those different levels of vulnerability, standing up for things, saying things. How do you support people through that journey? And what was that journey like for you? I mean, you have your own TEDx talk as well.
At first it's exciting and then it's terrifying, right? Because a TED Talk, the thought of it, the concept, the vision of it, watching these extraordinary people stand up there and speak, and go viral and speak to millions of people around the world. It's enticing. It's beautiful to witness. And then the dread comes over you like, oh my God, what was I thinking? And that's my job, to help calm people's nerves, help bring them back to their why. A TED Talk is not a highlight reel, right? It's a reckoning. What most people get wrong, I find, Jan, is that they focus on credentials instead of insight. So it's my job to keep them coming back to that insight, that idea, that they try to teach instead of reveal. And they hide the very moment that would make them unforgettable. So this applies whether you're on a TEDx stage or in a boardroom or pitching to investors or whatever. Your story isn't your biography. It's the moment you stop being who you were and became who you are. And that's the power of the work I do and why I love it so much, because I get to find out who you are. I get to be the first witness of that piece of your story before the rest of the world. And I tell you, there's nothing greater. It's the best feeling in the world to work with people and help pull that out of them, to excavate that.
Hey, I wanted to pause for a moment and invite you into a space that I'm holding with a lot of care. I recently gave a TEDx talk called Reclaiming Anger, a Woman's Birthright. Instead of sending out a link and moving on, I wanted to create a room around it. So on Monday, January 26th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, my good friend Karen Taylor is hosting a private virtual TEDx screening on Zoom. We'll watch the talk together, then stay for real conversations, reflection, dialogue, and guided prompts that will help you connect this work to how you lead, relate, and make decisions. It's an intentional, intimate gathering for women who are ready to stop managing their anger and start listening to what it's actually telling them. If this resonates, you'll find the details and registration link in the episode description. Now back to the episode. I'm about to ask a very vulnerable question. I'm putting you on the spot, but myself too.
Give it to me.
Tell me, obviously we worked together for months. What was it for you to see me that way? And what was the difference that you saw?
Well, you came with a very clear it doesn't always work this way. You were very clear that you wanted to do this TED Talk. This was something that was placed in your heart. I mean, you were strong, emotionally intelligent in your idea. You were focused, and you were pretty certain how intimate you wanted to go, especially with that anecdote with your daughter, but what struck me most, Yan, was how fully you were in yourself. You weren't performing insight. You were embodying it. That's the key. And as someone who works with speakers all the time, that's rare. So, personal, not flattering fluff. You know what I'm saying? That's why I love you so much. It's so real, and it positions you. Here's why that's so cool. It positions you as a discerning expert, right? And it allows you to be seen and not just praised. So your story, your energy, your message, it was just so profoundly real.
Well, that's what I remember when I was, rehearsing my speech at one point, and you're like, oh, I really felt it. I felt it from your body. And I felt it too as I was saying it. Like, it wasn't just memorizing the words. It's like that it lands in your body. You can feel that like emotional groundedness.
And I see that in your talk. I see it in the video, Yan. So many people, Yan, speak from the neck up.
Yeah.
And what struck me about you was that you were speaking from lived experience. That kind of truth is magnetic, especially right now. So that's why I take you through a process of embodiment, because if you're not in your body, if you're just up here in your head, then you're going to lose the moment, and rob yourself of that beautiful connection to your audience. So the embodiment piece, yeah, that's important. And you did that beautifully.
Well, and I think just to your point, right, that the realness, right, that people are craving, they want to feel that frequency, that emotion from people. And it's story as leadership, but not like performative, right? And I think you get away from that performative when it feels really grounded. And you can tell with the tone, the emotion, the body language of somebody. Because most women I work with have incredible stories to tell, but they've been trained to hide them, minimize them, or make them professional enough. And that actually diminishes a lot of the power of that story, right? So from where you sit, what is the cost of women not telling their stories?
Well, I think our current leadership landscape, speaks to this so profoundly and powerfully. That's a big, important question you just asked. Okay. When we don't tell our stories as women, we don't just lose individual voices. We lose context. We lose wisdom. We lose the roadmaps for what's possible. The cost is that culture gets shaped without us. That's the biggest cost. Decisions get made, policies get, finalized, narratives get written, standards are set without the lived experience of us in the room. So it's critical that we share our stories. When women minimize their stories, they also minimize their influence. And that means like companies, organizations, governments, movements lose leaders who could have changed the direction of the room, right? So there's a lot at stake right now, Yan. There is so much at stake. The cost is that women who are one chapter behind never get the story that would have helped them, trust themselves.
Yes. And I think this is like a powerful truth too. Oftentimes women are so caught up in other people's stories about them, about what's right or what's wrong, and they don't spend enough time on their own story, their own internal story. So sometimes when they go to tell their story, it's not concise, it's not clarified. They get lost in it themselves. And when you get lost in a story yourself, you often lose other people. So I also think, right, I do a lot of work with the women that I coach. Like, we need to own our internal narrative so that we can own that external story. Because like you said at the very beginning, if you don't own your story, somebody else is going to tell your story for you. And you may not like you, right? Like, you want to be the person in the room advocating for yourself or sharing about yourself so that the frequency is so powerful that somebody just can't be like, oh, Sarah's not that good. right? Like that's just somebody just saying it, right? But if you're consistent, if you know your story, if you know what you stand for, I think that leadership vibration, even in a corporation outside of that, is really powerful because there is just more of it and you're really clear, right? You're not questioning, you're not, sort of positioning yourself, like this sort of fakeness that you're like, oh, this is how they are in one room and that's how they're in another room.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And you're speaking to me directly because I had to go through that process myself, when I wasn't owning my own internal narrative, like you said. I disappeared. I fragmented. I became many versions of myself depending on who I was with. And that is exhausting.
Yes.
Am I allowed to swear on this show, by the way?
Yeah, that's okay.
I was about to drop an F-bomb, but I didn't. But you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's no wonder we're exhausted.
Yeah, we're carrying a lot of other people's stories. We're not being clear about our own emotions, how we truly feel about things for ourselves. And we keep, changing our story to fit somebody else's narrative until it becomes exhausting. We're burning out.
This is so powerful. And you know why this is also powerful, what you just said, Yan? Because as you know, you and I both work with a lot of women in leadership. Leadership doesn't begin with visibility, and we put too much emphasis on the visibility piece. But leadership begins with authorship. And until you and I claim our internal story, then the outer world will keep casting us or putting us in roles that we never choose. You know what I'm saying? So,
yeah, and I think this is what's really key here, right? If you focus on visibility without that authorship, then it becomes a performance game.
That's it. Period. And no wonder it's going to constantly feel off, like we're off our game, or, or the nervous energy, the butterflies keep showing up when we're not ready for it. We're feeling ungrounded. We never land.
We're always like bracing ourselves for the rug to be pulled under us because we're not grounded in ourselves, right?
Yeah. The women who struggle the most on stages or in big moments I find it's not that they're unprepared, Yan. It's that they're unclaimed. They haven't fully decided what their story means to them yet. So we're in a moment where everyone is reacting to everyone else's narrative out there, especially on social media. Oh my gosh. Online, in business and politics. So owning your internal story is not a luxury anymore. It's how you stay sovereign in a very loud world. The sovereignty, that's powerful. That's what we need to claim, our sovereignty. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, here's what, this is what I'm hearing, right? Underneath everything you're saying, that stories aren't about being seen. They're about seeing yourself first and owning that identity. And when a woman finally tells the truth of who she is, not the polished version, not the acceptable version, the real one, she doesn't just change her own life. She gives other women permission to come out of hiding too, right? With that vulnerability.
Beautiful.
Yeah. How does that hit you? I think
that's a foundational truth. That is a foundational truth of storytelling right there, girl. Yes.
I'm like such a big proponent of people doing this journey to tell their story, to tell it on stage, not because I want them to be on stage. I think that's a beautiful way of spreading your message, but I want it for themselves to reclaim themselves, to have that identity. It's like more about your own transformation and journey, and everything else is just like the cherry on top where that gets spread, right? But I think if you really love yourself and want to give yourself something huge, like being able to say, my story matters, I own my story, I want to stand tall and say my story, and that might take many iterations, right? But that is powerful.
That's okay, because seeing yourself doesn't mean branding yourself or polishing an identity, right? It means telling yourself the truth about who you are, what you've lived, and what it's cost you to become this person. That keeps it embodied and not just like heady and conceptual. So many of us chase visibility, like I said, before self-recognition. So when you haven't fully witnessed yourself, it took me a minute to get there, Yan. That's why I'm doing this work, right? Took me a long minute to witness myself first. And otherwise, you'll keep adjusting your voice based on how other people react to you. And people feel that instability when you're on stage or in a boardroom. It's a beautiful journey and it's worth every moment of it.
All right. So I'll leave everyone with this. What is the story you've been carrying that's actually been carrying you towards you becoming the next you? And what might shift in your leadership, in your relationships, in your life if you finally let it be heard? All right. I will leave the listeners with that powerful question. And I wanted to thank you so much, Sonali, for being on today's show, for sharing your wisdom and sharing all of the experiences that you've had. And I'd love to share with the audience out here, people that want to do their own TEDx talk. How can they reach out to you? How can they work with you?
Oh, thank you, Yan. This was a joy. I could go on for another hour with you, to be honest. But I would love to hear, I've brought over 49 women and a couple of dudes onto the TED stage. It's my joy and my jam. So people are most welcome to reach out to me at support@sonalifiske.com, or I'd be happy to share a link where they can book an actual, TEDx discovery call with me. And I'm happy to take them through that process to start the conversation.
We'll definitely link all of this in the show notes. And I don't know if I ever told you this, Sonali, but I interviewed. I do my due diligence, just like all of my listeners. They do their due diligence too, right? As a high achieving woman, you do that. And I had interviewed like 3 other people before I met you. And I had this just decided, after meeting you, I was like, whoa, she is way more like emotional and relational than I'm usually comfortable with. But I also knew that's the relationship I wanted to have with this talk. It wasn't going to be transactional. It's not logistical. By the way, if anybody's listening, you don't just do a TED talk and make tons of money. This is like from your heart. You want to do it, right? This, of course, it builds your audience. It builds your credibility, but it's a labor of love. That's what I think about it. And for me, I was like, who do I want to be, on this journey with? And it was you, Sonali, because I was like, okay, she is going to push me to my edge of my relationship with myself and my emotions. And you were just so not logistical, which is exactly what I needed.
Bless you for saying that. You made my whole day. Thank you. It's why I do what I do. I'm very maternal and instinctual and emotional with my approach to this. So, I think that's the only way, Yan, it takes, intellect and heart. That's the winning combination. So thank you for trusting in me. It was an absolute joy, and I wish I could do it all over again with you.
Well, there may be more when I have the next one. We're going to be promoting this one for a while. But yes, this is exactly the balanced leader is about merging logic with heart. And thank you so much for being on the show today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being a part of the Balanced Leader community. We hope you found today's episode inspiring and actionable. For more resources and to connect with Yan, visit us at aspire-coaching.co. Until next time, keep leading with confidence and purpose.
Hey, before you go, a quick reminder. On Monday, January 26th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I'm joining a private virtual TEDx screening of my talk, Reclaiming Anger, a Woman's Birthright, hosted by my dear friend Karen Taylor. We'll watch the talk together, then have a real conversation about what it means to reclaim anger as a woman in your life and in your leadership. This is a live, intimate gathering. You can learn more and join us through the link in the episode description.